teaching sex at school. The rules are going to change.
As yet, I've got no other words for sexual intercourse.
Make love.
After the uproar over books like this, the government is handing power to the parents. We ask, what should be taught and by whom?
Control over sex education will be removed from teachers and local authorities. That control will be given to new-style governing bodies, which will have more parents on them and are answerable to an annual parents' meeting.
Good evening. That was the Secretary of State for Education at the Conservative Party conference a week ago, declaring that in future parents will be able to decide for themselves what, if any, sex education should be given to their children at school. On Tuesday next week, the Education Bill is due for debate in Parliament. The government hopes that the offer of this new parental right will win back some 100 Tory MPs who've threatened to abstain or vote against the bill. However, it's not yet clear whether Mr. Baker's gone far enough to satisfy the rebels. Sex education is an extremely sensitive issue that provokes strong feelings. It also raises some tough and awkward questions. Who knows best what should and should not be taught? Are parents really able to discuss sex openly with their children? And do they, in truth, know what they're talking about? These questions are our subject tonight. Later in the programme, we'll be testing public opinion by means of an electronic poll, the results of which you'll be able to see while the programme is still going out. But to explore the issues of sex education more thoroughly, Trevor Phillips has been into the schools talking to teachers, children and their parents. I should tell you that some of the language that's used in the classroom is pretty basic, and some of you might find it distasteful. I assure you, though, it's not there to cause offence, but to record the real world of sex education.
That says sexual intercourse. That word is penis. Vagina.
Sex education teacher Carol Lee begins the first session in her 2-week course for Romford sixth formers. She's been running it for several years.
Masturbation.
Her first job is to get rid of the giggles, to take the embarrassment out of sex talk.
Okay, just give me words that you would use or have heard used instead of those words. And let's do it quickly.
Period.
Period. Menstruation.
Many parents would be startled by her methods.
You don't have to put your hand up, just shout.
Wank.
Wank. Okay.
Cunt.
20 years ago, this classroom discussion would have been unthinkable. Today, the biology of reproduction is only the beginning. Teachers also have to deal with the morality of it all.
No other words for sexual intercourse.
Make love.
Make love. Fine. Got quite a lot already. Any more?
Bonk.
Bonk.
Sex education of some kind is provided in just about every school in Britain. Until this summer, most parents knew little about what went on in the classrooms.
A swear word. That word is a swear word.
Everything changed when 5-year-old Jenny went to live with her homosexual dad, Martin, and his lover, Eric. Throughout the summer, the book provoked a storm of headlines. Some papers alleged that it was widely circulated in schools. Protesting parents were incensed by the book's sympathetic portrayal of a homosexual lifestyle.
Jenny thinks it over as she pulls on her pyjamas. "Can you and Dad have babies?" she asks. "No, you silly," says Eric, grinning. "We can love each other in the same ways as anyone else, but we can't have babies. Only women and men can have babies together. You know that." "So it's lucky you have me," says Jenny. Eric thinks so too.
But how widely circulated is this book? I asked a leading gay politician and school governor.
I think some schools have actually got it available to help them in their discussions with parents and children when parents ask questions about families where there are two parents in the same sex bringing children up.
But why is it necessary to have anything that specifically deals with the question of homosexuality for children?
Because children are very curious human beings and they ask questions straightforwardly about human behaviour and they must be answered without evasion. And some people aren't able to do that, so we have to provide materials that help them do that, to give straightforward answers to straightforward questions and not dodge the issue.
At Bournemouth last week, the Conservative Family Campaign. a well-attended fringe meeting of the moral right. If they can't get rid of sex education, they want tight controls, the right to opt out, and a ban on dubious books. The motto here is parent power.
It does seem to me that sex education has become a mass of conflicting ideas and ideologies, with some teachers promoting their own sexual preferences, prejudices, and proclivities. In other words, teaching gay lessons to what they believe as an innocent public who can be corrupted morally, spiritually, for their own personal prejudices.
It is the parents that they've got to listen to on this one, because what they seem to have done is that they have opened it wide up to the kind of exploitation that the youngsters are now getting from teenage magazines, and the whole lot is bound up together. Give the power back to the parents and let a good safety net for good teaching in schools for those parents who won't teach. But for those parents who want to teach, give them the right to do so.
Genital warts, like the common skin warts, are caused by a virus.
Well, about 3 months before I eventually came to the clinic, I noticed I had some lumps on my dick.
So what can schools do that parents can't? At the City of Portsmouth Boys' School, these 14-year-olds have the benefit of pamphlets, expert teachers, and films.
The virus that causes these warts settles on the top layers of the
The
skin.
alternative to getting this information in school is learning it from playground gossip, magazines, and TV.
If they aren't treated, they do clear up, but this may take a long time.
What did you feel you learnt from it?
So do they learn anything in the schoolroom that they wouldn't pick up from friends and parents?
Had you heard about syphilis before?
No.
You'd never heard before you watched that film?
No.
Anybody had heard about syphilis before you watched the film?
No.
No? None of you? Do you ever talk to your parents?
No, I don't.
They never
No,
talk to you?
No.
Why?
I don't know. Just never have done.
How did you first hear about sex?
Well, sort of in the playground, all bit of a laugh and a giggle with all the kids and that, joking about it and, you know, just taking a joke out of it.
When you were younger, where did you think babies came from?
Well, I was told that babies come out on a piece of string. And, well, just a load of lies, really, about where they came from and how they came about, that sort of thing.
Who told you that?
Oh, mates, brothers, that sort of thing.
If parents are to take over the job of sex education from teachers, they'll have to provide accurate information on a range of issues. The moral right claims that most parents are well enough informed to cope with their children's questions. This week put their claims to the test with a sex questionnaire. Our test took place back in Carol Lee's Romford classroom. At the end of the lesson, she asks pupils to write down more questions about sex. These are the ones they're too shy to ask openly. She offers an answer to each one, no matter how explicit the question. Later on, this week invited a group of parents to give their own answers to some of these questions.
Talk more about a woman's orgasm. What exactly is it?
I've got to be honest, I ain't got a clue. And I'll be honest with you, because I haven't.
What about Mr. Robinson?
Yes, I had that question whilst I was having breakfast, halfway between eating something. Dad, what is an orgasm? It's difficult. I've found it best with the two girls that I've had to wait till they ask a question and then come in with an answer. And I had to try and bring some similar thing that they may be involved in, sport or whatever. She does a little bit of sailing. And I'm afraid I chickened out and likened it to the feeling that she had when she won. The peak.
It is actually a physical muscle reaction, I think. It's something like vibrations of 240 seconds. It's muscle vibrations per second or minute or something. I can't remember the exact figures, but it was a muscular reaction. That's what it said in the article I read.
Would you discuss VD?
I would, yes. Not that I know a great deal about it. but I would discuss it, yes.
What would you be able to say to your child about it?
As I say, I don't really know a great deal about it, but if they was really interested and wanted me to find out, then I would either send them to somewhere that would find out, or else I would get some books on it. But what do I know, actually, is that not a lot.
Mrs. Marshall, would you discuss VD with your children?
Yeah, again, I don't know an awful lot about it, but I think I'd just tell them what I did know. But I don't think I can tell you here.
When exactly is the safe period?
It was supposed to be a week or so before your periods, isn't it, and a week or so after. But I thought they proved that there is no such thing as a safe period anymore.
Well, I thought it was 10 days before and 10 days after.
But I thought it was about 7 days before, 7 days after, the middle of the cycle.
I ain't bothered then, am I?
Whoops.
So, Mrs. Spong over here, have you got any ideas about this?
No, I've never risked that.
But
that is why I thought a week before and a week after.
Mr. Robinson?
Apart from the conclusion that no time is a safe time, I haven't any comment, I'm afraid.
Social diseases. Would regular checkups be necessary if you were having sex?
No. No, I don't think so.
What about, to the right, Mrs. Dobson? What do you think?
I'd say if you think that it's a man and wife relationship and you think that your husband is being fairly faithful, then I wouldn't think that there would be any real need for it. But if you are having various relationships, then I would suggest they do, yes.
Mrs. Smith?
Well, I would agree with that lady. Unless you've got a sort of an irritation or you're a bit worried down below, then I would say then go to the doctor. But apart from that, if it's just with your husband, I'll say no.
So how did they do? Class teacher Carol Lee assesses the parents' performance.
Well, actually, they illustrate the need for sex education in schools. With the best will in the world, there was an awful lot of confusion going on, an awful lot of contradiction, and an avoidance of some of the actual questions themselves.
Can you give me an example of the confusion that you were talking about?
Well, the confusion was when they were discussing masturbation. There was a confusion over social disease. They actually didn't even take into account that cervical cancer is a social disease. So if any child had asked any one of those parents about social diseases, as the question was asked, the parent would have said, oh, well, if you're not sleeping with more than 2 people or 1 person, you don't need to be checked. What they don't realise is the government actually says that every girl should have a check for cervical cancer, a smear test, within a year of first having intercourse. It's vital. We can't have young women dying of cancer of the cervix. And these parents, with the best intentions in the world, would have missed it completely.
So now that Kenneth Baker's giving the responsibility to parents, is he certain that they have the information to make the right judgments?
Well, parents don't have the knowledge about sex education.
If they're asked questions about... If they're asked questions about social diseases and so forth?
A staggering assertion. It's certainly not borne out by my own human observation of life as a family man. In fact, parents are very concerned about this. It's one of the most sensitive things that parents are concerned about.
They may be concerned about it, but what I'm asking is, are you sure that parents who are asked questions about a range of subjects, from sexual practices to social diseases and so forth, will have the information and knowledge to really guide their children accurately?
Yes, I think I am, because it's not just a question of knowing precisely about a social disease. I talked about that, the hygiene of sex. But this isn't just about the hygiene of sex or the mechanics of sex. It's about the moral framework. It's about the caring and loving relationships. That's the background which I think parents are concerned about.
What's the matter, Linda? Don't you fancy me?
It's not that, Kevin.
Well, what then?
It's just that I don't like...
Don't like what?
Well, you know, going too far.
If parents don't have the expertise to decide the content of sex lessons, could they at least lay down moral guidelines for sex education?
You can laugh,
But my mum says if a man respects you, he won't try at all.
I do respect you. What do you want me to do? Come round in a top hat with chocolates and flowers?
Might not be a bad idea.
This video offers one approach to morality. The heroine's answer to the perennial shall I, shan't I dilemma is a clear indication of what some pressure groups would like teachers to tell their pupils.
If you're waiting for the flowers and champagne treatment, you'll wait a long time.
Suit yourself.
Remember, Linda, if you won't, there's plenty of girls who will.
Oh, have I lost him now?
Answer, yes. But Linda's restraint gets her a white wedding, while the girl who gives in comes to no good. Mrs. Valerie Riches is campaigning to get this kind of moral message into schools.
I think it's becoming increasingly necessary and obvious that we have got to introduce a moral framework into sex education. If you look at the statistics of divorce and illegitimacy and abortion, all the things that were said would be improved by good, healthy sex education, in fact, have turned out to be exactly the opposite. We have a very serious problem with the family, and it's a recognition of those problems which makes us realize that we have got to introduce a moral framework and put sex education where it should be, in the context of the family, if we're going to try to solve some of the problems that are being created.
Some governing bodies may agree with Valerie Riches.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
So how would Michael Pipes, the headmaster at Portsmouth, react to this traditional and narrowly heterosexual framework for sex education?
You've got to tell boys, and I've got to recognise as a head, that some of them are going to grow up to be thoroughly homosexual. And there's no way in which we're moralising over that, except that it's against the law to indulge in homosexual acts below the age of 21. But we have to discuss these things. I know that in my school there are 30 or 40 boys who will live a totally open homosexual lifestyle when they leave here. That's what the statistics suggest.
And don't you ask your teachers to, as Mr. Baker would like, explain to them that this isn't the most desirable form of sexual orientation?
Look, if that's the way your genes are and that's your God-given inclination, all you can point out to them is the law, and all you can point out to them is the emotional and, dare I say, moral obligations of getting involved in this in a thoughtless way. But if that is going to be their lifestyle, I'm certainly not going to stand and be the judge of that.
I certainly do not want homosexuality to be encouraged. And in fact, by stressing the importance of the family life, and normality is the bedrock of family life, then one wants to encourage heterosexuality.
Some parents will object, whatever moral view a school takes. Others, like Bradford's Muslims, oppose all sex education. So parents will get the right to opt out.
I think I'm on the side of democracy here by letting the parents decide, and then, after they have decided the curriculum, then parents who still object can make a plea to the governing body.
Well, do you think more parents will take this option now than have done hitherto?
I think more certainly will.
And you're not worried about the consequences of that in school?
No, I think that this is all part of my proposal to increase the power of governing bodies and to increase the involvement of parents in governing bodies.
In Portsmouth, the staff oppose opting out on practical grounds. Boys who are withdrawn might be subjected to ridicule.
Take your jacket off, those good lads. Well done, well done. Morning, hello there.
They fear, too, that the increase in parent power will be a threat to teachers' control of what goes on in the classroom.
If a head like me can come to an agreement, an understanding with his employers and with his parents, and there is reasonable satisfaction, I argue that that is far, far better than me having to teach to some rigid set guidelines. Because in the end, sooner or later, the question's going to be asked, if you're not allowing the head and the staff to decide what's being taught, and you're teaching to regulations, hey, who's writing the regulations? And there might then be an even worse danger of a nasty political, or some other faction developing these guidelines. Please leave it with the schools.
OK, lads, with sexually transmitted disease and the film that we've seen, there's probably...
Some of the dilemmas of teaching sex to children. Now, to test public opinion, we're going to use an electronic poll. Obviously, not all of you can take part in it, But across the country, there's a selected and properly balanced sample of the public who've been watching the programme and have beside them in their homes a button which they can press to answer the questions put to them in our poll. The results of each question will show up on this monitor and, of course, on your own screens at home. With me to reflect on the findings is the reporter on that film, Trevor Phillips. So let's go straight away to the first question, and a reminder to those of you with your finger on that button, our panel, please don't press until I ask you. Now here's the first question coming up there. Do you think that sex education should be taught in schools? Yes, no, or not sure? Press your buttons now. Now you can see the lines moving, yes coming up very heavily. This is because the computer is digesting the results. It's moving around because people are pressing the buttons at a different time, but we should have them. There we have them. Yes, 80% believe that sex education should be taught in schools. No, 14%, not sure, 6%. Trevor, that's an overwhelming vote in favour of sex education still being taught in schools, which is perhaps not very surprising, because it has been for a long time. Did you find any amongst the parents that you were dealing with who felt that they didn't want to have sex taught in schools?
A very small minority of people who had particular views, for example, people who were Muslims or had some religious conviction, but the overwhelming majority of people that we've met really were relieved, I suppose, that schools took on this responsibility.
Was it regarded by parents who were coming to this subject as a result of what you were doing, perhaps for the first time, as a major and contentious issue or not?
I wouldn't say so. I suspect that most parents really are rather glad that the school takes it off their hands and wouldn't think about it in the normal course of events.
Right, let's go on to our next question, which is about responsibility. Who should be responsible? Let's have the question up now. There we are. Who should be responsible for the content of sex education classes at school? Should it be the local education authorities and teachers who are at the moment responsible, or parent governors who, under the proposed legislation of the government, would become responsible, or are you not sure? Press the buttons now. This, of course, is one of the most interesting areas because this deals with a very recent proposed change in legislation. It's shifting around there in the way that I explained earlier before, but we should just about get the result now, I would guess. There we have it. Teachers and local education authorities, 42%. Parent governors, 53%. Very few people not sure, only 5%. What we've got there is a majority, a small majority, but a clear majority in favour of the government's proposal. Now, what kind of response are teachers going to have to that?
Well, I think that teachers will be very anxious about that because they're already worried about the increase in parent power, so-called, intruding on their freedom to teach what they think is correct in the classroom. So I suspect a lot of teachers will be rather worried by that large vote for parent governors.
If, of course, parent governors decide that something shall or shan't be taught, and the way in which it'll be taught, teachers might find themselves in quite a moral dilemma.
Yes, indeed. I suspect that many teachers will one day find themselves in a situation where they're being asked to teach something in a way that they don't agree with, and there may well be some kind of confrontation.
Well, let's have a look at an issue which might indeed arouse some such confrontation. It's obviously the issue which has provoked the fiercest debate because of the publicity surrounding it, which is the question of homosexuality. If we have a look at the question now, we see that the question is, how should homosexuality be presented in school sex education classes? As normal, permissible behaviour, as abnormal, deviant behaviour, or should not be included in those classes at all? Will you press your buttons, please, the panel? It looks at the moment as if it's going in favour of normal deviant, but it switches around because of the way the results are coming in, and we should have it. There is a clear majority there. The normal permissible approach is 24%, abnormal deviant 46%, and should not be included 30%. Now, if my mathematics is roughly right, there is a very considerable majority there who believe either that it should be treated as abnormal and deviant, or that it should not be included at all, which presupposes, I guess, that it is thought by that 30% to be abnormal or deviant. Now, that is going to cause, again, problems for teachers. What is going to happen if school parent governors, in the majorities we've just seen, say you will not teach homosexuality as if it is normal? How are the schools going to respond to that?
Well, I think that
among the teachers you've spoken to.
Well, I think that they would find themselves in some considerable difficulty. We heard the headmaster saying that some of his boys would be homosexual, and there are teachers who have to deal with important subjects like AIDS. And the question that's raised for them is then, how do they approach the question of homosexuality in that context?
But under the proposed regulations, they would be obliged, as I understand it, to either say, we will teach it as the parents have asked us to teach it, or we won't teach sex education at all?
One can see a large number of teachers saying that we're not prepared to impose a particular moral view of homosexuality, though we have to discuss it, and that could cause considerable problems as well.
Of course, I should say it's not implicit in those questions that parents don't also think, or the viewers don't also think, that those who are homosexual should be treated as equals within society. We'll go on to the next question now, if we could have that up. It's a question about responsibility. Who should be the main source of sex education for our children? It assumes that sex education will continue to be taught in schools. Should it be parents, teachers, friends, or nobody? It's unnecessary to teach it. Could you now press your buttons, please? There we have the parents beginning to very heavily expected to have the responsibility there. Parents, 69%, teachers, only 22%, friends, only 2%, nobody, it's unnecessarily 1%. That's a very clear majority who are supporting, evidently, the minister's line. And I think if we could go on in a moment just to deal with the next question, which relates to the government's proposal that parents should be free to decide. Let's have it up now. There we are. It should come up in just 1 second. Not quite ready for it. It's about the right of the parent to decide whether or not the child, there it is, should parents have the right to withdraw their children from sex education classes? Yes, they should have the right, is the question. No, they should not, or not sure. Would you press your buttons, please? There we have it coming in. Again, I suspect a clear majority in favour of the parental right to exclude their children from sex education classes. 75% should have the right, 22% they should not have the right, and 3% aren't sure. What we have all the way through there, it seems to me, is a very clear set of views. Trevor, it's clear there that what we have is the framework for, in fact, a very sharp debate once it becomes much higher on the political agenda.
Yes, I think so. And what is clear here is that the principle that seems to be overriding is the principle that parents should have power over what goes on in school.
Right, thank you very much, Trevor. A general conclusion from that, I suppose, is that the minister appears to have broad support from throughout the country for the views that he's expressed and the policy that he's proposing to adopt. We had 80% believing that sex education should be taught in schools. We had a majority saying that parent governors should be responsible for what's taught. We had a majority saying that homosexuality should be treated as abnormal and not normal, and a huge majority saying that parents have the overwhelming responsibility. So with those thoughts, we end this subject, sex education. But I will go on for a moment for a brief word, if I may, about next week. We'll be using this electronic poll again in a programme which raises appalling dilemmas for government and for the rest of us. We'll be asking, how far should we go to try and halt the alarming spread of AIDS, the killer virus which is now known to pose a threat to anyone of either sex? That's this week, next Thursday. Until then, good night.